Thank you. I appreciate being here tonight. And as you mentioned, I've been in the radio industry a long, long time, 35 years now. Started right out of high school and started doing all nights on a little radio station in southern Saskatchewan, and loved it so much. I eventually worked my way up from on air to being a music director, to being a promotions director, to being a program director, eventually becoming a general manager in Toronto as well as London, Ontario. And the latest position I held with Chorus was vice president of programming for all of the radio stations across Canada. So I had the opportunity to work with some fantastic personalities, not just here in Toronto, but also in Vancouver and Edmonton and Calgary and Winnipeg and Ottawa and all across the country. And a couple of years ago, I decided that, I could see podcast was starting to take off, especially in the United States. So I started reaching out to some contacts that I have, and I've kind of grown that side of the business. So I primarily work with US-based podcasters. I've got clients from New York through Washington and Baltimore and Arizona and California, and pretty much all through the US now. So it's been fantastic. I'm really enjoying it. It's interesting working with podcasters because their background is not broadcasting. Their expertise is completely different. It could be interior design, it could be real estate, it could be HR, it could be photography, it could be a bunch of different things, and they're all looking for feedback on how do I do a better podcast and more entertaining content. So the principles between radio and podcasting are exactly the same. It all comes down to a story. You need to be able to tell an entertaining story in a way that creates some kind of an emotional response from your listeners. Think about it this way. Are you the one in the kitchen telling the great stories and everybody is gathered around? Or are you the one back in the living room or the fringes of the kitchen listening to the stories? Which one are you? And if you're the one in the kitchen telling the stories, you've got a great background to do podcasting. Because that's what it's all about. It's about telling a great story in an emotional sort of way that grabs your audience by the ears. That makes sense?
Cool.
Now, there's a whole bunch of different things you need to do with that. I mean, not just do you need to be able to tell an interesting story, but you've got to do it. You've got to have structure to a podcast. So one of the biggest things that I teach is what's called the James Bond rule. If you're a fan of James Bond movies, what happens during the first 30 seconds of every James Bond movie? Something blows up. There's action. There's excitement. Podcasters need to get to the point fast. They need to get to the action fast. Give me your main point so that you grab me as a listener by the ears and drag me into the podcast and keep me interested. People's attention spans are so short these days that if you don't grab them in the first 30 seconds, chances are they're gone. So get to the point quickly, and then go into sort of some of the background with the guest, and then fill out the rest of the content. But make sure you get to the action very, very quickly off the top. A couple of other things I stress is podcasting is an intimate one-on-one medium. You need to imagine that you're talking to just one person, and don't think that you're standing on the stage talking to an audience of thousands. Drop phrases like, "Hey everybody, how are you? I hope everybody out there is doing okay tonight. I hope you're all having a great evening." That's not intimate. That's not one-on-one. Use the word you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. We have a fantastic podcast for you tonight. Use the word you, make it your best friend, because now it sounds like you're talking just to me. And that's part of the magic of podcasting. Make it intimate. Use your range effectively. A lot of podcasters think that they need to sound like a radio broadcaster, and they need to kind of sound monotone, and they need to sound like they've got this fantastic voice, and they end up sounding so monotone that they're actually quite boring. Nobody talks like this, so why would you do it on your podcast? Use your range. Use the upper part of your range, use the middle part, use the lower part of your range, because that's the way people talk. When you get excited about something, you go up and you talk faster. And when you're making a serious point, you slow down, get a little quieter, and you make your point. Use your full range, use tempo, use pausing for effect, because that makes the story more interesting. It makes it easier to listen to. Resetting the stage. A lot of people do podcasts that are an hour long with a guest. And as your audience is listening, sometimes they forget who you're talking to. 10, 15 minutes, and just reset the stage. Hey, we're joined by Dwayne Richards tonight, and Dwayne has this company, and this is what Dwayne's an expert in. Dwayne, let's get back to talking about what we were just, the topic we were just on. Remind your audience who you're talking to. Give a little more background every 10 or 15 minutes, just to sort of reset the stage. Drop the pleasantries is another one. Have you ever listened to a podcast and they have a guest, and it's, hey, Dwayne, thanks for joining us. How are you tonight? Oh, I'm good. How are you doing, Dave? Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Boy, it's cold tonight, isn't it? Oh, it sure is, Dwayne. Man, oh man, is it ever cold. And what's going on in your life? Oh, not much. What's going on? And the pleasantries tend to go for 2 or 3 minutes before they even get to the meat of the topic. People have short attention spans. Get rid of all the pleasantries. Get right to the meat of the podcast. And one of the last things I want you to think about is, when you're interviewing something or somebody, resist the temptation to talk more than the person that you're interviewing. Let the person that you're interviewing talk. If you need to, turn your microphone off after you ask the question. Because as a listener to the podcast, it's frustrating to hear the person doing the interview going, yep, in the background. And it throws the guest off as well. The guest loses their train of concentration. So when you do an interview, the best thing you can do is listen more than you talk. And when you listen to the answers, it will guide you to the next question. Instead of going off your list of prepped questions, sometimes just listening to the conversation can naturally lead you to the next question, and it'll sound much more like a conversation than a stilted interview just going back and forth. And I guess the final thing I'll mention is just respect for the audience. A lot of people think that because it's a podcast, they can go on and on forever. There's a couple of podcasts that go over an hour. Some of them go 2 hours because they think the content is so great. Here's the reality. Not many people, I would say, of all the people that are doing podcasts, maybe 5% of you have the talent to pull off a 2-hour podcast, because you're such a great storyteller, because you're so compelling. Most of it, you get off course, and it's a whole lot of blah, 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 and it's not very entertaining. Just because you can go 2 hours doesn't mean you should. Keep it nice and concise and leave them wanting more. Respect the audience. They're busy people. Give them a 15 or 20 or 25-minute podcast and get them coming back for the next episode instead of torturing them by having to listen for 2 or 3 hours at a time. Nobody is going to do it. Trust me, nobody is going to sit through 3 hours of content in one sitting. It's just not going to happen. So that's a whole bunch of stuff. I've rattled through about 10 topics or so there. Hopefully people are taking notes. There's a lot to it. It's not easy.
That was fantastic. I actually put myself on mute, David, so that I wouldn't interrupt. So, because I've done that a couple times where I've actually started putting myself on mute, and then I start to go to talk, and then I'm like,
Right.
and then the person was like, I'm like, oh yeah, I got to put myself on.
Yeah.
But and then, hey, when you're doing, when we're using Zoom, it's easy to edit that out. Like I did that with a colleague, and she's in Ireland, and I started talking just because there was some background noise here, so I put myself on mute. And then she went on, and then I'm like, and then it's easy to edit that. Like those are easy edit fix. Like I'd rather be on mute than go too long. So wonderful. Now there was I want two more. Those are all great. That was a lot. I actually pulled up my phone and wrote the U piece. Like the U piece. That's like the money. Like that's the money piece right there. Like if you didn't get anything else, get rid of the pleasantries. Stop trying to sound like you're talking to 100,000 people, and
Right.
just sound like you're talking to the person on the other side of the kitchen table.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff. So
Yeah.
there was 2 tips when we met last time. There was 2 tips you gave me just to say. I said, hey, I don't like listening to my own voice either. So there was 2 tips that you shared, which I'll share one of them, which was, hey, when you're doing your editing, don't do this. Like I have my earbuds in, and you talked about, okay, when you're doing the editing, don't wear headphones, just listen to it naturally.
Yeah.
And then you'll hear it naturally. When we are wearing earphones or earbuds, we're pumping the sound right into our ears, and that's not natural. So when you're doing the editing, you can listen to it just like you would normally listen to it.
When people talk into a microphone, they tend to wear headphones and they turn them very loud. And what happens is you start to listen to the sound of your own voice. You start to think to yourself, oh, listen to how sexy I sound. Oh, don't I sound sexy? And you listen more to the sound of your voice than you do to what you're actually saying. And that's why people say, oh, I don't like the sound of my voice, because they're listening to the sound of their voice instead of what they're actually talking about. So I suggest you either take the earbuds off or take one side of the headphones off, so that you can get a more natural sound in the room, and it'll stop the echo in your head and you'll become less conscious about it. The other tip I give out loud here at home. If you love to read books, and your family will think you're crazy, but read out loud at night for 30 minutes and you'll get used to the sound of your own voice. You'll also get used to your range. Most people need to push their range a little higher and a little lower to sound more natural into a microphone. And when you read out loud, especially children, your range. So read out loud, get used to the sound of your own voice. And the other thing that reading out loud does is it strengthens your vocal cords. And your vocal cords are like any other muscle in the body. The more you use them, the stronger they get. And your voice will actually, over time, get more timbre, and it'll get more resonance, and you'll just sound fuller talking into a microphone when you exercise your vocal cords. So read out loud. Regardless, your family's going to think you're nuts, but do it anyway, because it helps in many, many ways.
All right. You told it like 10 times better than I would have. So thank you. That was a great tip. And actually I did a podcast, a Facebook Live with Gordon So the other day, and he also was just practicing reading. So again, when he was doing the Facebook Live, so he actually read like a chapter from someone else's book, again, just as a practice of, so same thing, if you're reading, like grab a book, and then, like you said, you could actually role play, like read the different, like if it's a story and there's someone talking, then if it's a male voice or a female voice, you can, and I interviewed Terry Fallis, and Terry Fallis, when he started his podcast for his books, he actually read his book, and then same thing, that he enjoyed some theater when he was younger, so he actually enjoyed playing kind of using his voice to change for the different parts. So
if you're lucky enough to have children at home, small kids, and you can read them stories, you're in a good spot, because what happens when you read very monotone and in a boring way to children? You lose their attention real fast and they're gone, right? They want you to act out the characters. They want you to use emotion. They want you to use the upper end of your voice and the lower end of your voice. They want you to make it exciting. So it's great practice to get used to your voice by reading kids' stories.
Wonderful. All right, so I want to thank you. That's been great because I wanted to keep it somewhat tight tonight. It was just, and because we're recording it, so now I want to give both Gabby and Natalie the opportunity. Hey, you're on live, and I want to share, recognize or value people who attend. So if Gabby or Natalie, if you have a question or two while we have David on tonight.
I have a question. So obviously, I'm in the midst of starting my podcast now, and I'm trying not to make my podcast be traditional business consulting type topics in terms of, what you do at your consultation and all that stuff. I'm trying to teach these individuals conversation style how to get organized in their back office so their business works for them. So is it that I'm podcasting once a week, once a month? That's my first question. How frequently should I have the podcast? And two, coming up with the titles or the ideas. That's where I'm struggling right now. I have a course that's called Visualize Success, but my marketing person says, well, what does that do for them? And that should be the title of the actual headline to the call to action. So name the podcast.
Right. So let me talk about frequency first.
Mm-hmm.
It's important that the content be good for each podcast. So if you can come up with great content every single day, then do a daily podcast.
Okay.
But chances are, again, 95% of the population can't.
Right.
It's better to do less podcasts that have more content and are more valuable than trying to get too much tonnage out there that might not be good. Because you've got one or two chances when somebody clicks on your podcast. If they're not entertained with the great content, they're never coming back. So I would rather see you post fewer podcasts that are of quality content versus trying to post every day with sort of half-ass content, if that makes sense. So make sure there's a really strong podcast. I think if you can post once a week, that's good. Even once every couple of weeks. And if you post once a week, it gives you an opportunity to do some pre-promotion as well. Mm-hmm. You can get out across social platforms and tell everybody that the new episode is coming. And here's what it's all about. And it's going to be posted on Tuesday. Make sure that you listen. Okay. And if you podcast or if you post regularly on the same day of the week, people get into that habit of looking for the podcast on every day. So just make sure that it's good content. And then as far as how do you come up with great topics, it's all about knowing your audience. You need to know who is it that you're talking to with this podcast. What are they all about? Are they male? Are they female? How old are they? Where do they live? What are their interests? What do they like to do? Do they have kids? What kind of restaurants do they go to?
So my ideal client, basically, and then figuring out who my listeners are.
Yeah. What's your ideal client interested in? Mm-hmm. And go from there. Is your ideal client male or female?
Right now it's female.
Female?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's talk. There's 6 things that women care about. Mm-hmm. Let's list them. Are you ready? What's number 1?
I'm drawing a blank. Right now for these women that I'm working with, it's time management.
Time management. So how is that about career?
Career.
Okay. So career, and we'll add finance to that. So they're interested in career and finance. What else are women interested in? Just women in general.
Their fashion.
Fashion. Let's put that under pop culture. So they're interested in fashion, they're interested in entertainment, they're interested in music and movies and all that kind of stuff, right? Okay, so they're interested in career and finance, they're interested in pop culture. What else are they interested in?
Growth and development within their business. So it's still career, but personal development.
Yeah, health and wellness. Health and wellness is another category. They're also interested in family and relationships, right? So there's another category. They're also interested in community and charity, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories that women are interested in. So try and think of topics that relate to each one of those categories, and you'll never go wrong.
Okay.
You'll always be on strategy if every time you come up with a topic, it fits into one of those categories. And then think timely and topical. We're coming up to Valentine's Day. What's some content that you can do about Valentine's Day? Because people are starting to think about it.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be spring. What special topics can you talk about during your podcast that relate to spring?
Mm-hmm.
We've just come through the holidays. Is there any specific content that you can do just for the holidays that makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So think timely and topical. What's going on in the life of my listener right now?
Yeah.
It's January 18th. What are they thinking? Right now, they're thinking about all the visa bills coming in after Christmas. What kind of topic can you do around that?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the top 10 interior design tips for $50 or less.
Yeah.
Because we know you're on a budget. All the bills are coming in. We know you're on a tight budget. So here's the top 10 things you can do for $50 or less.
Got it.
Right? Does that help?
Yes, it did.
Okay, excellent.
All right, Gabby. Gabby, I unmuted you. So do you have a question or two for David tonight?
Yeah, I actually have a question. That was a very, I'm glad I didn't miss this webinar or whatever it is you want to call it. It was amazing. And then I just have a question. Okay,
Yes.
So I have my own podcast, and one day I was really mad with drivers who do stupid things or say stupid things. I came in and I just recorded a podcast that people to be respectful and stop giving the middle finger to people like that. And I just posted that, and it was the most downloaded. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah. It had the most interaction. It had the most.
Oh my goodness! Within the hour, I had 550 downloads.
Yeah. So do you know why that happened? It's because your podcast had emotion. When we started this session tonight, I talked about the fact that you've got to tell a story, and it's got to have some kind of an emotional impact. And you were emotional, you were pissed off, and people were relating to that because they've all been in cars and they've seen the same thing, and you were relating to your audience one-on-one. You were talking about things that they understood, and you were doing it in a passionate way. That's the secret to great storytelling. That is the holy grail of doing great content, is having the ability to push people's emotional hot buttons. Fantastic. I applaud you.
Thank you. I get 5 stars, Dwayne.
Yeah,
You get 5 stars.
Thank you.
It works for me as well. I did a Facebook Live the other day, and sometimes I say it's my rant. So I went off about the law of attraction with people to say, for business owners who don't register their business for HST. I said, well, I don't make more than $30,000. Well, Mike, flip it the other way. Is that you're also telling the universe that you don't want to make more than $30,000. So
you're limiting your thinking.
So I went off. So I got a bit emotional because I am in numbers, and my numbers and my accountant hat came on, and I said, let's look at the other way. Is that why not just get set up from day one? Because you actually incur more expenses early in your business, and you can get a GST refund. And let's just agree that the reason you don't want to do it is because you don't want to do the administration. You don't have to actually put a system in place, or by going through and actually registering, it says that you actually are in business. And now once you've established you're in business, you can't kind of take a step back and say, well, maybe I'm not. So there's all kinds of things. And so I did it as a Facebook Live, and same thing. I think that one actually got up to like 3, because then people shared it. Yeah. Because then it was good content, so then other people hit the share button because they're like, wow, he's on fire tonight. And like Gordon says, our mentor Gordon says, people come to, when you're on fire, people come and watch. So.
Well, let me say one thing. Let me say one thing about getting emotional or getting fired up during a podcast. I caution you that it does need to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Don't just get emotional for the sake of being emotional, because then you'll come off as fake. And the audience is smart. If they think you're faking it just for the sake of getting emotional, they're going to leave you, because now you're no longer authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So use it sparingly, use it in the right place. It can be extremely effective, but nobody wants to hear somebody rant on every podcast,
Yeah.
because then it gets a little tiring.
Yeah.
So, moderation is the key. It's like anything. You can talk about anything on a podcast, just do it in moderation.